LBC News.
Hello, Faye Barker here with you until 7 this evening, covering John Stratford for the rest of the week. Let's just get some more now on our top story. And Downing Street says more than 30 countries will help with peace efforts in Ukraine if there's a ceasefire deal. It has been confirmed Donald Trump will speak on the phone to Russia's Vladimir Putin tomorrow. And in the last hour, the Foreign Secretary David Lammy has been speaking in the Commons. He had this message for President Putin.
Now it is Putin who stands in the spotlight. Putin who must answer. Putin who must choose. Are you serious, Mr. Putin, about peace? Will you stop the fighting? Or will you drag your feet and play games? Play lip service to a ceasefire while still pummeling Ukraine? My warning to Mr. Putin is this. If you are serious, prove it with a full and unconditional ceasefire now. And if Putin does not deliver, Mr. Speaker, and I must tell the House that I currently see no sign yet that he is, the G7 meeting helped us ready the tools to get Russia to negotiate seriously. We're not waiting for the Kremlin. If they reject a ceasefire, we have more cards that we can play.
The Foreign Secretary David Lammy there speaking in the last hour. Let's now speak to LBC News correspondent in Washington, D.C., Simon Marks. Afternoon to you, Simon.
Afternoon, Faye.
So, of course, tomorrow we now know there's a significant phone call between President Trump and Vladimir Putin. How much do you think will actually be done when it comes to actually seeing some kind of ceasefire, or a ceasefire, in fact, in the war between Russia and Ukraine now?
There's obviously a lot riding on this call. I think there's no question about that. I mean, that piece of audio that we just heard from David Lammy, which, if nothing else, demonstrated the astonishing use of plosive P's, and he was practically spitting out the word Putin there whenever he articulated it. I mean, that is definitely not the attitude that the Russian leader is going to encounter from the United States government. They are not as sceptical here as the British, the French, and other European governments are about whether Vladimir Putin is serious about this peace process or simply trying to run out the clock on it to boost the prospects of his own military continuing to take territory in Ukraine and continuing to push Ukrainian forces back, particularly from the Russian region of Kursk. The official word from the Trump administration is that they believe that Vladimir Putin is serious about trying to engage in this effort, even at a time when the Russian leader is laying down an astonishing number of preconditions for Ukraine to meet in order to secure his own support for this 30-day ceasefire. So the conversation is going to be taking place tomorrow at some point. We haven't seen a time yet from the White House, but presumably in the morning Washington time, the late afternoon, early evening Moscow time, between President Trump and President Putin. And President Trump speaking on board Air Force One last night as he was heading back to Washington from a weekend in Florida, insisted that a lot of work had been done with the Russians and the Ukrainians over the weekend. He said, we want to see if we can bring the war to an end. And he was pressed on that by reporters on Air Force One. What kind of conversations did he anticipate in concrete terms that he might be having with the Russian leader?
Well, I think we'll, be talking about land. It's a lot of land. It's a lot different than it was before the war, as you know. And we'll be talking about land. We'll be talking about power plants. That's up, it's a big question. But I think we have a lot of it already discussed very much by both sides.
You'll ask him.
Ukraine and Russia.
You'll ask him.
We're already talking about that. Dividing up certain assets. Yeah, and they've been working on that.
Now, that notion that a lot of work has already been done talking about the details, not just for a 30-day ceasefire, but the details for a long-term peace between Ukraine and Russia, leads to some of President Trump's critics to question whether he isn't actually pre-gaming the outcome of all of these talks by essentially negotiating away chunks of Ukraine's territory, negotiating away the right of Ukraine to become a member of NATO, promising Vladimir Putin that the United States would support Russia's return to the G7 and possibly making promises to Vladimir Putin about relaxing American sanctions that are in place against Moscow. And from the perspective of the British government and its European neighbours, they are nowhere near as ready to embrace this idea that the details of any kind of peace have actually been negotiated, because so far there hasn't been a single face-to-face meeting between Ukrainian and Russian negotiators, at least not in the weeks since President Trump indicated that he was really serious about moving all of this forward following the drubbing of President Volodymyr Zelensky in the Oval Office just around a fortnight ago. So how much he thinks he has negotiated this versus how much the Ukrainians and the Europeans particular think has been finalised, I think is going to test just how far this process is able to go over the short term. But there is absolutely no question that that call between the US and Russian leaders tomorrow is going to be a very important moment.
Yeah, absolutely, Simon. And we've also heard so much talk, haven't we, from the US, in particular Donald Trump, that more needs to be done by Europe when it comes to Ukraine. We've had more than 30 countries said to have signed up to support a peacekeeping plan in Ukraine now. I mean, what is the reaction from Washington to this move by the Europeans?
Well, on the one hand, it's manna from heaven to the Trump administration, which has argued and did so during the first Trump administration, that Europe needs to be taking more responsibility for its own defence and, of course, committing more money to pay for its own defence so that the United States can gradually withdraw and focus its attention, instead of attention on Europe, focus its attention on Chinese expansionism in the Asia-Pacific region. But it is also evident that there is going to be a challenge in the relationship between Donald Trump and Europe, and that is that the Europeans are steadfast supporters of Ukraine at a time when Donald Trump clearly is not, and that the Europeans may well not approve of all the concessions that the Americans may already be making in conversations with Moscow. There's also the not inconsiderable issue of security guarantees. Sir Keir Starmer, the British Prime Minister, and other European leaders have said that the United States needs to provide robust, muscular, military-based security guarantees for any kind of peacekeeping operation that the Brits and others mount between Russia and Ukraine. The Prime Minister has talked about an American backstop supporting the presence of British peacekeepers on Ukrainian soil. The Trump administration has dissembled on that issue and absolutely has not publicly indicated that when they talk about security guarantees, they mean guarantees that are backed up by the potential use of American force. So there's a huge gulf already developing over that issue. And there's also, of course, the constant irritant of President Donald Trump's threat to slap tariffs on the European Union, an organization that he has described in scatological terms was created to mess with the United States. So there are tensions in the relationship anyway that are only going to be underscored by whatever happens in this call tomorrow with Vladimir Putin, the outcome of the call and the impact of the call on negotiations over Ukraine.
Yes, all eyes and ears indeed on that important call tomorrow. We'll be perhaps chatting to you about that around this time tomorrow if we get more news. But for now, LBC News correspondent in Washington, D.C., Simon Marks, thanks so much for joining us.